Welcome to the DEEPMED Seminar, a history forum for ocean, science, strategy, and environment. The DEEPMED Seminar is brought to you by the DEEPMED project, which is an ERC-funded project on the history of the discovery of the deep Mediterranean Sea. And today with us we have Marie Krefting, who is a historian of ideas at the University of Oslo, and she has studied particularly intellectual history in Europe, including France, Denmark, Norway, with topics ranging from free speech to the creation of the public sphere. Today, she will talk about something that I think she's working on for a forthcoming book. Is that true, Ellen?
Yeah, at least for a chapter in a book.
Wonderful. So, yeah, please tell us about the title of your talk is Ordering and Visualizing the Ocean in Early Modern France. Very inspiring. So please go ahead. Thank you very much.
So I will just have a short introduction. As you know, I mean, the ocean floor is gaining increased attention these days. Not only as a space of increased curiosity, knowledge, and legibility, but also of conflict, extraction of all kinds, and vulnerabilities, right? So we have heard about this already in the seminar series, and the DEEPMED project itself attests to an historical attention brought to the deep sea. Despite this, or maybe just because of this current historical interest, I don't know, we tend to uphold a narrative that very roughly says that people in the past were ignorant of the deep sea and the ocean floor. Even historians often argue that the early modern period was totally lacking any interest in or conception of the undersea and the sea floor. However, the fact that the depths were scientifically discovered and mapped increasingly from the latter part of the 19th century onwards does not necessarily imply that people living before this period, for instance, in the early modern period, were totally lacking interest or knowledge in the depths. And I think there are many ways of debunking this kind of myth, but I will start with this map, or this early French bathymetric chart. It's not necessarily only bathymetric, but this is a French hand-drawn chart of the Atlantic from the late 16th century. And it is containing all kinds of interesting information also about the undersea. For instance, as you can see in the upper part, southeast of Newfoundland, there is depicted the Great Bank, which is also represented on this French chart from a little later on, from the 17th century, of the Central Atlantic, made by an hydrographer called Georges Boisset du Bocage. He was the first royal professor of navigation at the navigation school in Le Havre. The same Bocage, he also made this quite detailed chart of the Great Bank and its different levels, plateaus. And as you can see on the top here, from the legend, it includes not only depth indications, but also indications of life at the bottom. Crabs, for instance, and a key, which is a kind of small fish. both of them, both the crabs and the fish, probably bottom organisms that codfish are feeding on. So these charts mirror, of course, the colonial and commercial interests of the French state in the period. You know that les Terres Neuves were colonized by France from the mid-16th century. But what is striking here, I think, is the quite detailed attention to the subsea bank. And the reason for this, this particular attention is, of course, that this was the world's richest fishing grounds for the Atlantic cod, exploited by Europeans and French vessels from the late 15th century. And we know that this, the importance of this transatlantic, these cod fisheries was huge. Marine environmental historian Paul Holm has suggested that the cod fisheries had perhaps greater economic impact on Europe and hence on the entire modernity than the colonies. But we all know the result of this, the total collapse of the world's greatest cod stocks and a ban on the Great Bank cod fisheries in 1992. And we also know that the stocks are yet failing to recover. I am working quite a lot on charts and sea maps at the moment, as is Helen, who is present here, as a part of a project called Maritime Modernities, Formats of Oceanic Knowledge, funded by Norwegian Research Council, which I'm leading from Oslo. You can see the webpage if you want to look for more details on this, but I will not talk about this project or nor about maps or charts in this talk. I will rather talk about this text from the same period as these cartographic works I have showed you. I will talk about the French Marine Ordonnance of 1681. This is a law text, which hasn't really received much attention, at least not outside quite specialized parts of French legal history, economic history, and political history. And I'm not specialized in either of these fields, really. I'm a more of a all over the place general intellectual historian of the 17th and 18th century, as Lino said in his introduction. But what I want to present to you is my close reading of this text as a whole. And I approach this text as an expression of a quite broad and complex, but also historically situated ocean imaginary. An ocean imaginary that did not only address the two dimensions of the surface, but even the undersea. And as you see here, I read this ocean imaginary or ocean construction, or whatever we can call it, as a kind of image revolving around three very general but also very distinctive oceanic features, which are freedom, risks, and riches. These are all, I guess, features that highlight elemental oceanic qualities. To a large extent, they are opposed to the elemental qualities of land. So So this ocean imaginary kinds of support a very important land-sea binary, which I think is still kind of haunting us today. So what I aim at doing by this close reading of such a text is to try to weave it into a larger ocean history, and hence try to recognize this text's part in the historical making of a modern ocean and a land-sea opposition or binary, which I said has been so important to, I think, a modern human relation to the sea, theoretically as well as practically, I guess. And before I go on, I have to say that this is work in progress, not something I have published anything on yet, which is the reason why I'm really interested in your reactions and comments. So hopefully it will be published one day, perhaps in a collected volume originating from another Norwegian-based ocean history project, which is called the 3R Oceans, which had the overall aim to analyze how deep-seated cultural conditions has underpinned the use of the oceans, and which also aimed at investigating the relationships between the representations, resources, and regulations of the high seas and the deep oceans over a quite extensive period of time of 400 years. Now I will turn to this text, which is one of many law texts, ordinances that were put together by the French Minister of Everything, Colbert, as a strategic instrument in the economic development of the French state in the 17th century. Some of these ordinances that Colbert put together were quite explicitly singling out parts of nature as particularly valuable as objects for cultivation, extraction, and conservation, as what we could call today natural resources. His pioneering forest ordinance of 1669, for instance, defined forests and inland waters as French natural resources to be extracted, but also to be managed, controlled, and protected for posterity, as the law text says. And I do think that we find the same logic behind this marine ordinance, issued in order to understand, develop, harness, but also govern and control the ocean as a particular yet hugely complex natural resource. And the complexity of the ocean plays out on many levels, and did so in the 17th century as well, including the political and the legal levels, of course. In the 17th century, as you know, there were no clear distinctions between territorial or coastal waters and the international high seas. And the entire fluid space was marked by what Lauren Benton has characterized as legal regionalism, as well as legal pluralism. Private merchants, customary law, Sorry about this. I have a speaking Siri back here. Okay, so there were, I mean, this ocean space of the 17th century was marked by what Lauren Benton has called legal pluralism. So private merchants, customary law, coastal lords' privileges, and fishermen's interests and usages intersected with competing national and colonial legal corridors of sovereign jurisdictions. And moving ships played a crucial and dynamic role in this legal jumble. They were regarded as pieces of quasi-territory, as Renisa Mavani, among others, has demonstrated. And this sort of legal, perhaps global legal jumble also had its national dimensions, as in France, where a plurality of ancient and recent customs, laws, and jurisdictions, each with certain powers in matters relating to specific maritime activities and affairs in coastal waters, as well as the high seas, appeared to Minister Colbert as a problem to be solved at the national level. Hence, his intense efforts at collecting and ordering what he called all maritime matters, and his issuing of this one comprehensive and uniform code for the marine world. The highly composite and legally variegated ocean, with all its local jurisdictions, should transform into one specific, legible, and governable space in order for France to be able to compete with the two dominant oceanic powers at the time, the English and the Dutch. Okay, so the result of 15 years of collecting and synthesizing was this vast regulatory system pertaining to civil and commercial sea usages in the Mediterranean, as well as the Atlantic Oceans and beyond. And I have to add that this was pertaining to the commercial activities at sea. So an independent ordinance for the Navy was completed by Colbert's son and published in some years later in 1689. There are nearly 750 articles in this ordinance, and they are divided into 5 sections that dealt with a vast array of subject matters. As you can see here, the 2 first books define administrative structures and powers on shore and on board ships. Book 3 regulates every type of marine contract and includes a large section on marine insurance, which is perhaps the most well-known part of this law text. Book 4 covers the policing of harbors and coastal areas and the law of wreck, while the last book, Book 5, deals with coastal as well as overseas fisheries. And as you can see from this, this law, this extensive law lays out a regulatory regime for activities, mainly activities at sea. But what I will try to demonstrate is that it can also be read as an act of ocean making, an act of ocean imagery making, as it is drawing up this vision of a multidimensional ocean, which, as I read it, revolves around the three conceptual clusters of freedom, risks, and resources. And if we start by freedom, I mean, this is an old topic, of course, but it is quite extraordinary how this law text puts forward this ancient notion of the ocean as by nature wild, chaotic, ever-changing, inscrutably immense, and boundless, and therefore an element that, unlike land, never have been and never could be subject of any kind of dominion or exclusive possession. It follows, according to this law text, from this wild nature of the sea, that it cannot be anyone's property. So this text is quite explicit on talking about the ocean in singular in opposition to seas in plural, which sort of mirrors this insistence upon the boundlessness of the ocean as such. And this is a recurrent topic throughout all the 5 books, really. There can be jurisdictions at sea, but never exclusive dominion or sovereignty, which is, of course, not only part of a kind of oceanic elementalism, but also something which benefits international trade, which is, according to the Ordonnance, also an essential part of human nature, trade as a humanity's natural inclination. So what is striking here, of course, is how this French law of 1681 taps into a philosophical and legal discussion with equally ancient roots on the freedom of the sea, which Hugo Grotius had resuscitated with his 1609 pamphlet, as you know very well. Without mentioning Grotius explicitly, this French law uses these the same arguments of the wild, undividable, and hence free elemental nature of the sea. First, in order to promote the natural and legal unity of all maritime matters distinct from land. But this insistence upon the specific boundless nature of the ocean also serves to defend freedom for all to navigate and to trade and to fish. And in this law, these points they are used strategically in 2 directions. Internationally, the natural law arguments serve in the Ordonnance to oppose nations, such as England's claims to exclusive navigation and fishing in larger ocean basins based on age-old convention and tradition. But also domestically, this argument is used, the free seas argument is used to counter and to oppose all the private claims to property and exclusive rights to the seashore and coastal waters, which had haunted France for a long time, according to Colbert and his team. And relating to the history of ocean space, I find it really interesting how this French law insists upon the importance of outlining still a kind of spatial, natural border between land and sea. It says that everything that is covered by the sea during a full moon and new moon in the month of March, when the tide is at its highest, is defined as part of the seashore and therefore belonging to the sea. So these efforts to define the natural limits of the sea from land, which makes it possible for the law to prohibit anyone from making any kind of construction or edifice in the area of the seashore that can obstruct free and peaceful navigation. It is also, I mean, these arguments are also used to restrain local lords, as I said, in coastal areas from taking possession or of or jurisdiction over parts of the seashore. As being by nature part of the sea, the seashore is defined as a commons, and sovereign regulation is required, of course, in these areas in order to secure the natural freedom and common usage of the seashore from private possession and obstructions. However, these swaths of sea beyond the seashore and what is called the open sea, or just the ocean in singular in the law text, raised a different set of spatial questions. As the law was republished several times with extensive commentaries up until the French Revolution, we can sort of follow how this topic and this question and the topic of the ocean versus the territorial seas close to the shores enters into the French legal thought during this period of time up until the French Revolution. In an important 1760 commented re-edition, this commentator Vallin, he argues that although Grotius, of course, was right on the natural wildness and boundlessness of the oceanic element, a certain stretch of water, even beyond the shoreline, can and must be defined as belonging to a sovereign's dominion. The extension of these territorial waters beyond which there can be no such dominion is, however, a construction, this commentator says, and not something natural. But still, he suggests a solid way to assign the conventional limits of a sovereign's dominion based on a certain depth measured by lead sounding, and not on the reach of a cannonball, which is most famous, perhaps the most famous way of defining this in the period. But this is by he's suggesting that it should be defined by a certain depth measured by lead sounding. So the idea is that, and I quote, beyond the probe's reach, the sea should be cleared free for navigation and fishing, since it cannot be anyone's domain, because ultimately the ocean with major O is belonging to no one, and the natural conclusion to be drawn from this is that it is permitted to all nations, to all others, as long as they are not unjust and do not have an immoderate or extravagant ambition, end of quote. So this was just a small dive into this complex of freedom, and I will just now move to the second conceptual cluster, which centers around this idea that the ocean as an element is by nature very unpredictable, extremely dangerous, or in the text's own wording, full of perils. And this is also, of course, an image that dates way back, linking activities at sea to the iconography of Fortuna, goddess of chance and destiny, master of luck, as well as of misfortune. And fortune de mer is an old French expression with Italian and probably also Spanish parallels, and it was even used as the name of a subgenre of maritime paintings in the 17th century. And it is an expression repeatedly used in the French Ordonnance, referring to the natural unpredictability of the ocean. And it is translated into English in an English translation from around 1710 into maritime accidents. So Fortune de Mer translates as maritime accidents in English. So the whole idea here is that while you cannot control the hazardous nature of the sea itself, you can convert hazards into the technical notion of risk. So risk is also a recurrent notion here. And I guess you'll know the quite long history of this notion of risk, and I will not go into this. But acknowledgement and regulation of the business of commercial risk management and prime insurance contracts played a key role in this third book of the Ordonnance on insurance. And I could say a lot about this, but I think time is running, so I will just jump to this last conceptual cluster, which I read from the law text, which is really important and deserves more attention, I believe. And this is relating to this elementary nature of the ocean dealing with the riches of the undersea. The last part of the law address the riches surging from the beds and depths of the ocean, such as fish and mussels, as well as the peculiarly hybrid category of varech, legally defined as, and I quote, all things that are brought ashore by storm or maritime accident, or fortune de mer, which is the French expression here, or are brought so close to the shore that a man on a horse can touch it with his lance, end of quote. So this part of the law establishes clear distinctions between property rights to various categories of wreck items and between rights to sunk, floating and stranded objects. And most interesting, I think, is how the Ordonnance defines and lists the highly amphibious category of varech, which includes not only dead human bodies, clothes, jewelry and other precious things, as the law says, but also dead fish and whales, and the particularly precious kind of seaweed, which we now call kelp in English, which was at the time an important marine resource to coastal communities. So varech, stranded on the seashore, was defined as free to all persons at all times and in all places according to the law. Seaweed growing on the rocks could, however, also be harvested. It could be harvested like crops in the fields. And this kind of varech did not fall under the general category of wreck, and the harvest of kelp further out from the shore was heavily regulated, not only because it was a precious resource that could be shared equally in coastal communities, but also because kelp and seaweed were considered by fishermen as crucial for fish brood and spawn. This particular regulation, part of the law, however, raised a series of tensions and fights in the decades following the issuing of this law, fights between several parties over Natural resources between landlords who refuse to renounce their ancient territorial rights to the seashore and the things stranded there, and the low coastal populations who were in deep need of kelp as a fertilizer and fodder, and the fishermen who were particularly worried about the consequences of overexploitation of seaweed for the decline of fish stocks. These conflicts, they grew even more intense at the end of the 17th century, when it was discovered that burnt kelp could also be used to produce soda ash, an essential component in the manufacture of glass and soap. And you know, the rise of the mirror industry in France, for instance, is an important backdrop here. But still, the strict regulation and policing of the harvesting of seaweed was officially defended again and again by the state long into the 18th century, by references to the legal principle of the Ordonnance of the common usage of the seashore. But the regulation was also defended by repeated references to the role of kelp for the sustainability of fish resources, which I find really interesting. In the 18th century commentaries to the law, we find extensive arguments about what we today perhaps would call the ecological functional role of seaweed, such as this, and I quote from the 1760 commentary in my own translation: regulation is still needed in order to protect the fish spawn and the small fish, which are too weak to resist the waves that haunt them even when the ocean is not particularly agitated. They find shelter under the kelp, where they profit from comfortable temperatures caused by the sun that during summer warms up the part of the seashore that the sea covers during the high tide or the time before it retreats, etc., etc. End of quote. So this is, I think, really a demonstration of a very strong concern that human overexploitation can do harm to the riches of the sea. Here, particularly focusing on the harvesting of seaweed. This is also apparent in the ordinances regulations of the fisheries, which is the main concern of the last book of the law. Here, this repeated principle of the freedom to fish in the common sea was combined with strict regulation, which was deemed necessary in order to protect the free usage principle especially from private appropriation, and in order to protect the marine resources from abuse, exploitation, and depletion. Hence, the freedom to fish overseas at the Great Bank, as well as along the coasts, was limited by royal licenses, privileges, and licenses, as you know. So all vessels over a certain size needed royal license in order to be able to use the sea for whatever purposes. But in addition to licenses, the regulation of fishing is extremely detailed in the ordinance, giving really precise prescriptions concerning time, places, and fishing techniques. Pointing out the sizes of net meshes, for instance, and how one should use different kinds of engines in order to protect fish stocks from over-exploitation. So the prescriptions, they are accompanied by an administrative structure for surveillance by the local maritime police. So clearly there is an idea of conservation here strongly present. The ordinance really explicitly aims to protect the fishery in its original state, as it is commented by an early edition and commented edition of the ordinance, and such arguments were far from original in this period, the late part of the 17th century and the early part of the 18th century. We know that regulatory measures for limiting the exploitation of fish had existed since the 13th century, first targeting freshwater fish, then extended increasingly to coastal marine resources towards the 17th century. So this law is in fact continuing a long-established tradition in France when it formulated these detailed prescriptions on fishing practices concerning these specific periods, places and gears for each type of fishery, herring, mackerel, cod, etc., mentioned explicitly in the law. Yet the ordinance added for the first time a coherent system of surveillance and policing by requiring verification of nets by the local admiralties and by regular inspections. And it also ordered local officers to confiscate and burn prohibited fishing gears and to apply other sanctions in case of violation. However, and I am approaching now the conclusion. However, the regulatory regime did not prove very efficient. During the first decades of the 18th century, French fishermen all along the Atlantic coast, at least, experienced and complained about abuses and depletion of fish stocks. The recurring complaints resulted in the establishment in 1722 of a royal inspection looking at the various fishing techniques and practices along the French Atlantic coast. The aim was to identify the gears that caused the most harm and probably also causing the depletion of fish stocks. And the fishery inspector, who was this Le Maçon du Parc, who also in fact made these extremely interesting panoramic illustrations of the various fishing gears and techniques along the Atlantic coast. He was particularly hostile to the use of the dredge, the bottom dredge, as you can see on the right side here, which he believed destroyed not only young fish and fish spawn, but also mussels and seaweed. This inspector's reports sparked growing attention to the need to protect fish, spawning fish and fish eggs for the restoration of fishing. It resulted in a 1726 royal ban on the usage of the dredge without a special privilege from the king. The ban was lifted some years later due to these recurring conflicts over the economic consequences often, and also due to alternative explanations for the depletion of the fish stocks. In this period, local knowledge was deemed less and less valid by the state and also by the Academy of Science, and the entire regulatory regime of fisheries broke down by the end of the 18th century. Yet, what this whole process of discussion and negotiation and conflict during the 18th century demonstrates I think is that an historical point that has been made already by several environmental historians. One of them is Jean-Baptiste Fressos, who is really pointing out that there hasn't really been a lack of awareness and concern in past societies of the human impact on environmental and ecological degradation. There have been taken measures for conservation and sustainability. There have been what Fressos calls moral grammars that have provided rules of conduct towards nature, such as the ocean and the resources of the oceans in this particular case. So these worries and concerns and discussions have had their own complex and historically determined ways, very different from ours, but still they have been there. So just to conclude or sum up or whatever in two important points, I think here, this marine ordinance, this French law of 1681, as I have tried to show you, was an attempt at collecting and ordering all maritime matters under one national code. And by this law was also constructing, I believe, one comprehensive, if not coherent, ocean imaginary based on the specific elemental qualities of the sea versus land. And this image, I think, quite strikingly, was not only concerned with the surface. It was a volumetric image capturing also the living underwater parts of this fluid element. Secondly, I believe that what this reading also demonstrates is that thinking the ocean as one natural resource in past societies has not only involved extractivism, but also conservationism. Varieties of what we call ecological knowledge and awareness or concern is not absent in historical sources. There is not a linear history moving from this kind of past lack of knowledge and careless extractivism in the past to a sudden awareness and care today. The conflicts of interests relating to the marine ordinance regulations of kelp harvest and fisheries, for instance, reveal a complex and non-linear history of strategic political choices. And I'm here, as you can see, inspired by Fressos, who says that to ignore this kind of environmental awareness in the past is also to ignore the concerns and the conflicts related to them. It is to depoliticize the long-term history of environmental deterioration. And Fressos also says that we need to take on board, and I quote him here, the disturbing fact that we entered the Anthropocene knowingly, and we need to think the contemporary situation in continuity with the past, less as a threshold in environmental awareness, and rather as the culmination of a history of 2 centuries of conscious destruction. We could perhaps add another century to that, but I will end then by this rather pessimistic conclusion from Fressos, which I believe also pertains to the history of the ocean. The destruction of environment and ecologies has occurred not as if nature accounted for nothing. On the contrary, it proceeded despite an understanding of its consequences. Okay, I have talked for a long time, but this was it, and I will try to stop sharing my slides here.
Thanks a lot, Ellen. It felt very short, so thank you very much for that wonderful talk. The floor is open for questions. I think you're still sharing. Probably you don't see us. Do you see us, Ellen?
I can see you now.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. It's wonderful to see you. It's really so strange to talk into the screen. So
I know.
I'm happy to see you.
If there are no questions yet, I have a couple. Did you? Okay. I mean, the first one is pretty obvious. You rushed a little bit in the insurance part of the risk part. I don't know if you would like to just say a couple of sentences of what did the ordinance change regarding that, or if anything. So this ocean making in that regard, and then.
Okay.
I have a couple of more questions. I can maybe leave them there. You mentioned your work on early modern maps. I don't know if you are, if there are links between that story of the maps and this story of the ordinance. And then the third one would be, what is the role of the history of science and technology? You mentioned it at the end when you talked about the local knowledge being opposed by more academic knowledge. So what is the role of the history of science and technology in this long evolution of the ordinance that you trace? If you see, I don't want to use the word innovations, but I think I already did. So if you see technical innovations affecting the commentaries, if you have new possibilities affecting the commentaries like 50 years after it was first published or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Huge questions, these, of course. And just to comment on this insurance part, this is actually the most the part of the ordinance that has attracted most attention, scholarly, historically, not because it was really innovative, but because it was a kind of synthesis of different kinds of insurance practices that had been developing. I mean, especially during the 17th century, but and also internationally with these centers in Antwerp and Amsterdam, especially in the Dutch areas, but there were all kinds of local practices and uses of insurance, maritime insurance technologies. And so the importance of this part of the law was that it had Colbert and his team had collected over several years all these different principles and practices of insurance contracts, and this was really an attempt to make an order out of this. And I do think, and from what I've read some of these studies of this part, and they all kind of point to how this part of the law became a model for other nations' insurance regulations and principles. And also, this is exactly a period where also the French state ventured into creating insurance companies. So I don't know what to say about this, but still, this is regulating and prescribing, all this rules for how you make up an insurance contract, and the liabilities and prices, and what you can insure and what you cannot insure, etc., etc. But I find it striking how it also, I mean, mobilizes these concepts of fortune de mer and the unpredictability, the hazardness, and all the perils, and yeah, so these elemental features of the ocean as such. So to the next question about maps. Of course, I mean, there are so many links between this ordinance and all these efforts to map. So Colbert, he is also initiator, you know, of all kinds of scientific and technological developments, and he is also initiating, in fact, by this law itself, the establishment of schools, navigation schools, and schools for hydrography and ocean mapping techniques, etc., etc. And this author of some of the maps that I showed you in the beginning, he is one of these first appointed, you know, professional hydrographers who is working on producing all this new maps of interest of the French, I mean, oceanic interests. So there are all these links between the history of cartography here and this law. And then to, I think, the most difficult question, how, if I can say, if I know of examples of how developments in the history of science and technologies affected the commentaries or the way this law was developing or used during the 18th century, perhaps. I don't really, I do not think I can answer that really, because I mean, this is a period, this is really the very early period of the work of l'Académie des Sciences, and I mean, to my knowledge, the developments within cartography is perhaps the most important history here, but I cannot tell you really how the developments in cartography really affected the use of the ordinance. I haven't seen explicit traces of that actually, but I mean, I do know that I mean, we see that these establishments in the 18th century of institutions, knowledge institutions, such as this depot of maps and all documents concerning the ocean in 1720, for instance, is referring explicitly to what is prescribed in the ordinance. But yeah, I think it's difficult to answer that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. There are other questions here in the room and online. Aina, could you go ahead, please?
Hi. Well, I'm Aina, as you see, and as Lino said, we don't know each other. That's true. I'm finishing my PhD in history of science based in Barcelona. And well, I was interested in the talk, so that's what why I joined. And it's because a huge part of what I'm doing is on François Le Maçon-du-Parc.
Oh, nice. Really wonderful.
So I saw, because I was doing a bit of research before, because I didn't know you, Ellen, so I wanted to for sure contact you. And I saw you cite Romain Grancher on your project proposal. And I'm really, really keen to know if you are doing more work on this personage or not, and in what sense. And of course, if it would be wonderful to keep in contact. And I'm really, really sorry because I need to leave in 5 minutes, but I really wanted to thank you for your insight.
Let's keep in touch.
And,
really,
it's been really interesting because, of course, I know the Ordonnance, but I hadn't been going that deep into it. But more working the first 2 decades of the 18th century, just before his inspector.
Yep.
And yeah, I think we maybe can find nice connections.
Yes, that would be really, really great. That would be great. And I'm really deeply indebted to Romain Grancher on this. I haven't been doing really original work on Maçon du Parc at all. I have, I use this as a kind of to show you how this ordinance sort of the afterlife of it, so to speak, and it's really wonderful. And you should all have a look at these 2 volumes of his reports that were reprinted in 2004 and 2009, I think, or something, with all his wonderful illustrations, his drawings of the fishing techniques. But if you have, we can keep it in touch. But if you have something you would like to add on him, it would be wonderful.
A lot, but it's the one thing I could say now is that I found out not that like weeks ago that he's not the one doing the drawings, but
he's not. Oh, that's a really important point.
Has someone doing the drawings for him, and I was thinking, like, does he really do all the work? But bits by coincidence, but looking for something else, I started to find something, and it should be someone called Le Chevalier from Dieppe, as he was. But yeah, it's a really interesting person, and I don't know. I know the DEEPMED project is not focused in that aspect, maybe more in but I think it's indeed worth, and there are a lot of things and materials in the archives that are still to be worked on. I think there is this wonderful edition of his works from the 24, 25, so from the moment he's inspector on, but he's done a lot of things before as well.
And he was working on this huge manuscript, the history of fisheries, on the history of fisheries, that remained unpublished, but it was taken up later on by more famous people.
So all this paperwork, but unpublished. And I think this goes with what you mentioned at the beginning, that it seems like, but by the unknown sea depths or sea floor. And it's maybe not that they were unknown, but it's not published maybe, or we don't know that much, and we just think they didn't care or they didn't know. But I think we start to find little things that show us different. Same with the ecological concerns. And okay, I'm really sorry.
Nice.
Thank you all so much for the organization and having it public, so people like me can join, and let's keep in touch.
Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Aina. We hope to see you in further occasions. Thanks a lot.
I'll try. Thank you.
I've got questions here.
Go on.
I actually had a question on Du Parc, which is, I think maybe Ellen won't be able to answer it, but these fishery policies around 1722, one of the interesting things for me is the fact that it seems from what you told that DUPAC is investigating what the fishermen are doing, but is not actually involving them at all in building the knowledge that is needed to make these new rules about what can be done, what cannot be done in terms of fishing. Is that something that is the case, as far as you know?
Maybe Aina know. She probably knows more about this than I do. But my impression is that he's quite close to the fishers themselves, and he's actually referring to really detailed aspects of the activities. For instance, what is noticeable is that he's talking quite a lot about female fisheries, women doing this work along the Atlantic coast. So I do think that he's really, that's my impression at least, he's relying on local knowledge quite a lot and their concerns. But Aina, do you want to add to this? Can you add?
Well, I totally agree, and he's a person. He's not. He's a commissar, and but because of concerns, or he really does ask to the local people. So that's one of my points in the thesis, that he does a bottom-up knowledge gathering. It's a bit of a early modern citizen science what he's doing, and. Well, not the same, but like this concept of I need to go to every harbor, to every fisherman, to every person working at sea to know what they are doing and what they are doing wrong, what can we fix. So he really travels around the coast in France and has contacts to gather all this information. So
So if I can just add something, because I think Romain Granger is making this point that in this period of DUPAC, I mean, local knowledge is everything, and then you have this along. I mean, in after the middle of the 18th century, there is this competing or knowledge from l'Académie des Sciences. That increasingly downplays the local knowledge, you know. So what happens? I don't know. I don't remember the decade now, but sometime after the middle of the century, all this local knowledge is kind of deemed invalid, and then there's l'Académie des Sciences send out this scholarly committee to make experiments with kelp and the effect of harvesting of kelp on the fish stocks, and concludes that there's no relation between them. So this is just in opposition to what the local knowledge had among the fishermen had said. So I think that's a point to be made.
One more thing that I think is important to keep in mind here is that just asking the fishermen to share their knowledge is one thing, but to check whether that makes any sense in a technocratic way, kind of. I think I got the feeling from what both of you are saying that is what's happening. They're not necessarily taking the local knowledge seriously as knowledge, as of a similar epistemic value as what the academy might be doing. So in that sense, it's a very technocratic endeavor, if it would be that. Whereas in other places, such as the Netherlands and in Venice, there is a much more democratic kind of decision-making process going on in the same time period. So do you see that like a more democratic, that might not be the right word, but like shared knowledge making, or is it really a technocratic endeavor where they kind of extract from the local fishermen?
Well, I guess you're right. We deal with France here, and I mean a very centralized system of knowledge as well as of regulation. So so I guess you're right that this is a technocratic kind of involvement of the local kind of collecting, you know, knowledge from locals more than than democratic sharing of knowledge. I don't know. You're probably right about that. But I don't know if you. I'm relying on you here. You're really the specialist.
I think it's very interesting question. I don't have the feeling that it's totally extractive, but I wouldn't say it's also as democratic as other cases. Maybe it's something, but I should think a bit more about this thing. So thank you for the insight. So I'm sorry, I just need to go, but thank you all.
Okay. Hi, Ellen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for this very interesting piece. I enjoyed it a lot. So I can see quite clearly, I can follow your argument that how this process of regulating the sea also consisted in ocean imaginary making. But I was wondering, ocean imaginary making for whom? Because, for example, I'm interested in the sort of contradiction between this attempt to create a unified international ocean order for national interests, and so how did French officials expect other nations, empires, entities to sort of abide by their national law regarding the international order? And if they did at all expect that, and if it how could they sustain then their sort of what's the word? I'm sorry, I'm missing the word, but ordering of their national borders, maritime borders, in the face of, again, this heterogeneous international order and imperial order as well.
Yeah. Thank you. This is really the most challenging aspect of this. First, I have to say that I call this an act of ocean making, but a making of an ocean imaginary. But that is, of course, not intentionally. Perhaps it's not. My reading of this is not necessarily corresponding with the intention of Colbert or his crew, you know. But I think historically speaking, we can see and read this as also giving the afterlife and the importance after of this way of thinking and of this regulatory, I mean, regime. We can see it as that. So that is just to say that it's not necessarily an intentional ocean making of an ocean imaginary, but it is an intentional lawmaking. I mean, this is so. And how does this law relate to other nations' ways of thinking, borders and jurisdictions and sovereignty, etc. But because I think it's I mean, in this period we cannot, although we have Grotius and all these discussions about the freedom of the seas, we cannot really talk about an international order, legal order of the ocean. So this is really a period of legal pluralism and of very much confusion, perhaps we can say, or everything is sort of fluid and in the making, and I think France in this period is just trying to take advantage of a kind of situation to create something that's work for them. So and in doing this, this law is also kind of marking out, you know, the kind of this is the seashore and the territorial waters and this ocean with the huge O, you know, which is the open sea. But I mean, it's not really confronting anything else than the claims to possession by the English. So that is, if this law is referring to I mean, this international context, it is the claims of the English, really. So, but I think it's an interesting point where you can go in and look at how these things are developing. This ordering of the ocean space.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much, Helen. Very, very interesting. In this moment, I'm studying similar things, but in the rivers of Spain. Then I remember your work, several cases in Spain, the rivers. But in this case, the role of the God, of the religion, is very important for managing the domain. Then my question is, what is the role of the God, of the religion in this ordinance?
The role of the
God, the religion, because for example,
yeah,
God,
religion.
sorry,
Yes.
God. For example,
Religion.
in the case of Spain, is very important because the God is the property of the nature. Do you understand me? Okay.
Yeah.
Then it's similar in France or not?
No, God is strikingly absent from this law. So that is why I think we can talk about this is a kind of argumentation which is based on natural law arguments, which is of course also related to religious arguments, but they are absent in this law. So here it is. We read about I mean the natural particularities of the ocean as an element, and of humanity's inclinations towards trade, etc. But religious preferences are absent.
Bonjour Hélène, est-ce que je peux parler avec vous en français?
Oui, bien sûr. If I can answer you in English, it's...
D'accord. Je vous remercie tout d'abord de votre intervention. Et je vais vous poser une question, enfin, du point de vue de la perception. Je ne sais pas si vous avez pu rechercher dans le domaine des perceptions, c'est-à-dire jusqu'à quel point une perception beaucoup plus scientifique de la mer, de l'océan, de l'autre, a contribué à changer la perception de la France et au-delà de la France, de l'Europe.
Okay. If I understand you correctly, you ask whether a more scientific perception of the sea has affected the image or the perception of France or Europe?
Oui, effectivement. C'est-à-dire, comment va changer? C'est-à-dire, à partir, je crois que de 1580, Montaigne prononce une phrase en disant « Notre monde a découvert un autre monde ». C'est-à-dire, pendant le VIe siècle, toujours, on n'avait pas la perception d'avoir trouvé un autre monde au-delà de l'océan. C'est à partir justement de la croissance de la science, à partir du XVIIe siècle, qu'on commence à avoir une vision plus approfondie de beaucoup de choses, entre autres, je repère aussi, de l'océan. Je ne sais pas si, à partir de ces moments, vous avez pu, vous avez pu rechercher l'impact en France de ces documents, du point de vue de la perception de la propre nation, de la propre France, et au-delà de la France, ce qui m'intéresse encore plus pour mon domaine, pour ma ligne de recherche, au-delà de la France, c'est-à-dire de l'Europe, qui commence à former, parallèlement au XVIIe siècle, une perception beaucoup plus culturelle vis-à-vis de l'autre, vis-à-vis pas seulement la religion, de musulmans depuis le VIe siècle, mais aussi vis-à-vis la culture qu'on découvre au-delà de l'océan. Je ne sais pas si je m'exprime.
Yes, perhaps I do think I understand perhaps where you're heading, because this has not really got to do with the ocean themselves, but how understanding or traveling or exploring the oceans, how that affects the French cultural outlook, perhaps. Is that it? I don't know if I understood that correctly, but I'm not really sure whether this attempt at understanding the oceanic world in itself opened new venues for cultural development. I don't know really if do you have yourself something in mind that you think you could share?
Non, merci. Je viens d'une approche historique qui travaille justement la perception de l'Europe. Et justement, je trouve des points de confluence entre ce que je viens de découvrir ce matin à partir de votre intervention et quelques conclusions que je suis en train justement articuler. Et justement, ce qui m'intéresserait serait juste comment et jusqu'à quel point la découverte plus précise, plus scientifique, a une influence sur la mentalité de l'époque, à partir justement du XVIIe, mais surtout à partir du XVIIIe siècle, qui est le moment justement de l'éclosion de la science et de la connaissance, entre autres, justement, de la mer. Et parallèlement à ces mouvements, on trouve, moi j'ai trouvé dans mes recherches en France, justement, et j'ai trouvé une éclosion de textes qui prend, à partir de ce moment, à partir du XVIIIe siècle, en considération de plus en plus les mots Europe et la définition culturelle, pas religieuse, mais culturelle et politique différenciée des autres, surtout, pas seulement vis-à-vis le pays de l'Est, mais surtout aussi de l'autre côté de l'océan. C'est justement ça. Merci beaucoup. Hein.
Merci beaucoup à vous. Very interesting question, and I have to think about this really.
Oh, hello, Ellen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for a great presentation. So apparently, l'ordonnance was probably perceived as a holy grail for regulatory frameworks of all things maritime, like you mentioned. So I was wondering how this vast regulatory framework, the text itself, was perceived, and what were the reactions from other maritime nations, and also especially maritime nations who were just beginning to sort of develop maritime related policies of all aspects, and what aspects of the text had the most impact. Was it the territorial waters versus international high seas aspect? Was it the fortune de la mer, or just the fisheries policies?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, again, super interesting question. I mean, France was not a real maritime power at this point. Colbert, England was, and the Dutch. They were the huge maritime powers at the time, and Colbert, he was really doing an effort, all he could, to build the French muscles, maritime muscles, in competition with these two other maritime powers. And the way he did that was by making laws. I mean, that was really one of his sort of main instruments in aiming at developing France's economy, and also the overseas trade and fisheries. I mean, England and the Dutch, they were rivals to France, so they were probably not very interested at first in this French ordinance. But what is kind of interesting, I think, is that this ordinance was translated into English and published in a huge volume, collecting all kinds of maritime laws from the Middle Ages onwards, and translated in this collected volume into English, and actually also in the introduction by this Alexander Justice, who made this translation. It was kind of lifted up as a model. So, and he actually says in the introduction that although France is our enemy and huge competitor in all things maritime, this law is really, really great. So, so that's, I mean, that's how it works. I mean, Colbert, he was good at lawmaking, and especially, as I said earlier, this part on maritime insurance became really, really important to many European countries during the 18th century. And I don't know about the other parts, the parts on fisheries, etc. Probably not so much, because those regulations very much depended upon this very centralized state technocratic regime, as we talked about earlier, which we don't find in England or in the Dutch area, I guess. But thank you for the interesting question.
Just to follow up a little bit on that, it's super interesting that France is not in the 1860s a big naval power, but then becomes one through these measures that Colbert is taking, and a couple of decades later probably is one through all kinds of like navigational, astronomical, kind of technological and scientific innovations. And only after that do these translations appear, it seems. So there could be a sense, perhaps, that at some point France does become the model for English and Dutch people to follow.
I suppose a lot of people would disagree on that. France has really gained this, became a superpower in maritime affairs. But I guess when it comes to maritime lawmaking, this is really becoming a kind of inspiration or a model, and also in the area of as you mentioned, science, l'Académie des Sciences and cartography, and also in the making of institutions and infrastructures for information collection and exchange and distribution, because this is really an aspect of this law that is, I haven't talked about it, but it's really important how it really prescribes really in detail all these kinds of how one should do the paperwork on board ships and copy them, and how they were supposed to be collected and used by also scientific institutions to develop and to ameliorate cartography, for instance, etc. So very detailed prescriptions of how to keep logbooks, how to what to note in them, how to deliver them, how they were supposed to be collected and used afterwards. So this whole information system. I mean, Colbert, he was the minister of all things information as well, and really a model for these kinds of infrastructures relating to maritime affairs, scientifically as well as administratively, I guess.
Good. So comparing powers is always hard, but we shouldn't forget to mention, obviously, which you do not in other parts of the world, the huge maritime Iberian empires of the time, and it would be very interesting also to see what was happening there in terms of regulations and the questions that you're asking, because as you know, and you mentioned elsewhere, the Mare Clausum was the official doctrine of the Pope of the Catholic world, of the both Iberian and Portuguese, Spanish and Portuguese empires. And then the questions of jurisdictions are of course very interesting, but I have no idea how do they relate to resources, for instance. Yeah, I know how it relates to navigation and war, but not to resources. And kelp, for instance, in Southern America was very rich and so on. So it would be very interesting to know more about that.
Yeah, that would be super interesting. So if any of you come across sources,
Jeep is our person for that job. In the future.
Good, really nice.
Okay, are there any more questions? We've reached the time, if not, so we can also let Ellen take a rest after this wonderful Q&A. If there is any pressing question, we can have room for it, but if not, thanks a lot, Ellen, for your presentation and answers.
And thank you for inviting me. It's really inspiring to talk to you guys. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Great. So we'll see you in the next one, and we'll stay in touch.
Yep, we will.
Have a good day of the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.